Hello and welcome to another episode of Unlock the CPA Exam Show. In this show, you will get the tips, tricks, and advice to help you pass the CPA exam on your first try and become the most trusted professionals in the world, CPAs. This is your host, Ala'a Abu Dayyeh, and today we have with us Nikki Winston. Nikki is an accounting expert, CPA exam review instructor, and host of the Workin' Mamas podcast. Having worked in corporate America for almost 2 decades, Nikki has managed a $26 billion portfolio of securitized assets, built a robust operational risk management function for middle market companies, and created accounting policies and procedures for clients in the post-merger integration phase. He particularly enjoys helping candidates achieve success as they pursue the CPA certification. Nikki has been featured as a speaker at accounting conferences across the country, and her career advice for millennials has been featured by Forbes, the Elevate Network, and Reader's Digest. After passing the CPA exams, Nikki created her own CPA review course to inspire more minorities to pursue certification. Well, thank you, Nikki, for being with us today. It is a pleasure having you in this show, and thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thank you, Ala'a. Super excited to be doing this with you today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So can you tell us a bit about your background and how you arrived in your current role?
Sure. So my background has been, I'm 16 plus years into the accounting industry. I studied accounting in my undergraduate career at The Ohio State University, and accounting was just always something that I knew I wanted to do. I was just really intrigued by how accounting really tells the story of a business. And now in 2019, we have really evolved from being just these back office button pushers and doing debits and credits to really being a strategic partner for companies of all sizes. So it was really, it's really been fun to watch the evolution of the industry and how we have become such an important role and played an important role in strategic decisions and really helping management drive the direction of a business. So I really just started my career out as a general ledger accountant, doing the typical month-end close responsibilities, the debits and credits, and the more questions I asked, I kind of opened up a can of worms, if you will, because it was like every time I asked a question, I ended up taking on more work. But I appreciate that because I was able to learn a ton about accounting. I mean, when you mentioned securitization, I didn't know a thing about securitization until I actually stepped into the role. And I stepped into that role because I asked about it. What exactly is it? What does it mean? How does it help a company? And just going through my career with that professional skepticism is a huge part of why I've been able to get to where I am today as a leader of an accounting department. I run the department for an almost $1 billion organization. I have a team of accountants and accounting managers that work under me. And as you mentioned, I love helping CPA candidates really get over the hump with the exam because I struggled with the exam. I mean, I sat 13 times before I became certified. So I understand that it's a struggle, and trying to do it as a working professional or as a working mom just adds more complexities to the journey itself. So I just always like to share my journey with people to say, look, if I can do it, you absolutely can, because I felt like I had every possible obstacle in my way.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And you have really an interesting story, which shows how you had to defeat the struggles you had and overcome the obstacles you had in your
Yes.
life.
Yes,
Yeah, so,
absolutely. Yes.
that's amazing, amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, what are your FAR exam preparation tips and advice?
So FAR, and to be honest, I felt like FAR was the easiest section for me, but that was because of my day job. When I was working in securitization, I worked in securitization for maybe 5 years, just over 5 years. And that involves a lot of the FAR content, right? So there's bonds, there's the premium and discount amortization, the journal entries, the balance sheet reconciliations. I mean, the majority of the FAR content and the things that I needed to know to pass the exam was my day job. So it was kind of a little bit easier for me. And I hear people say all the time that, oh, FAR is so hard. And even candidates who haven't even sat before are like, it's so hard. And I said, now, you're just letting people get in your head, people who have taken it before that are sharing their experiences with you. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same experience. I mean, of course, we all have that uneasiness about FAR just because of the sheer volume of content, right? But for me, it was a little bit easier for me, but I find that the thing with FAR is that it builds. So you start off learning about transactions, you learn about the general ledger accounts, you learn about how those accounts are presented in the financial statements, whether it's the P&L, the balance sheet, the statement of cash flows, or owner's equity in this case. And then you have to put all of that together to make it make sense and to make it make sense for a third party or someone external to the company. So I'm a fan of learning by doing. And when I work with my students that I coach and that I tutor, I tell them, if you're struggling with FAR, the easiest way to learn it is to find your favorite publicly traded company, whether it be a Target, a Nike, or whatever. Find their financial statements, find their annual reports that they filed with the SEC. Almost every, if not every publicly traded company has an investor relations section on their website. Go on there, find their most recent annual filing and download those and try to make sense of what's going on. Because when you look at the AICPA's blueprints for what you need to know for the exam, literally everything that you need to know is contained in the financial statements. And so I try to tell candidates, make it real from the beginning. You know, it's one thing to sit there and go through the study guides and watch the videos, but if you can do that in conjunction with seeing the actual financial statements, how the information flows, how it's presented, the different analyses that go into calculating margins and different business metrics that management is concerned about, all of that is contained in those financial statements. And I just want to clarify that a little bit because most of the annual reports can be hundreds of pages long, right? So as long as you have the pages that include the financial statements themselves, the income statement, the balance sheet, the statement of cash flows, and the footnotes and disclosures that talk about the different accounting policies, you pretty much have the foundation for the content of the FAR exam.
Yeah, that's great. So using real life experience and real life examples is critical to understanding the FAR material.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, that's applicable to any section that the candidates are taking, because a lot of people confuse being done with the exam as being the end of the journey. But really, that's just the beginning, because now you have to go out and practice, whether you're working for another company, whether you're working for yourself. Now you have to show us what you know, right? Because you have these real clients who have real problems and they're paying you real money to solve their real problems. So now it's up to you to show what expertise do you have? How can you bring value to your client or to your employer as a CPA?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what about your audit exam tips and advice for preparing for this part?
Yep. So audit, interestingly, was the one that I struggled with the most. And I actually struggled with audit in undergrad. And I don't have any, I didn't go into public accounting. I didn't do any of the audit track for a career. My career is strictly general ledger, industry experience. And so the one thing that I will say about audit is that it's very much correlated to the FAR exam, right? Because the financial statements, which encompasses most of the FAR content, that's the management's perspective and the board's perspective of the organization. And then you have the auditors, who are the external party, coming in to validate what the managers and the board is saying. So the one thing I try to tell candidates that I work with is, when you take FAR, try to make audit the exam that you take after that, because now you're evaluating the FAR information that you actually have been learning. So the great thing about FAR is that there's a finite amount of content. I mean, when we think about FAR, it's just really a shot in the dark, anything that you can be asked. But when you think about audit, there's only certain things that they can ask you about. The audit report, the auditor's responsibilities, management's responsibilities,
Yeah.
the evidence and all the data gathering. There's only a certain amount of information. So continuing along the path of FAR, of obtaining your favorite company's financial statements, that annual report also includes the audit report, which is the auditor's opinion. So it's also a best practice to get familiar with that audit report, understand the type of verbiage that you'll see in the report, the order of the paragraphs, what management is responsible for versus what the auditor is responsible for. And then just try to understand if it's a qualified opinion, what would that report look like? If it's an adverse opinion, are there additional paragraphs, like the basis for the opinion, that would be included? So audit was one of those sections that, again, it's very correlated to FAR, but it's a lot of data that you, like little bits and pieces that you have to know. So I created a ton of flashcards for audit when I was studying, along with looking at real audit reports to make sense of it.
Yeah, that's great. Very helpful, really, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are your reg exam tips and advice?
So reg, I actually took reg the most. I took reg 4 times. And I feel like 2 of those times I probably could have eliminated had I been paying attention. So obviously we can't divulge what's the content of the CPA exam. We all have to acknowledge that. But reg is very dependent on knowing the authoritative literature. And there are a lot of administrative things to know, a lot of rules to know, really the protocols and how to do things. And so I'm thinking back to my exams when I left something blank or I felt like I didn't know it. But there are additional resources on the exam that candidates need to understand is available for them to use. And so that's I'll leave it there because, again, we can't divulge what's on the exam, but there was a key component of reg that I kept missing. And I think that's why I kept failing the exam, because I didn't realize that the authoritative literature was there for me to use. And if you're on the path of taking exams and you're just at the point where you're wanting to be done and you're studying and you're sitting for your exam, it's those little details that you miss that can cost you points and have you retaking exams. So reg for me was pretty dry. I mean, it's just a lot of rules, and I mean, it's called regulations for a reason, but just a lot of rules and understanding different fines and penalties and exceptions to the tax rules. So again, a lot of flashcards I made, but just really paying attention to the details and understanding what's being asked, which is why I always tell candidates, make sure that you are familiar with the AICPA's blueprints as far as what content you need to be familiar with in preparation for the exam.
Yeah, great. Me too. The reg part was for me one of the most difficult parts, especially that because us as international candidates, we
Yes.
never took US taxation before, and we are not familiar with the US taxation. So the
Okay, yeah.
material was totally new, and like we began from zero studying. And I did also a mistake, like I did not focus on the taxation a lot. I focused more on business law, although taxation has more percentage in the exam from the business law, and that was a mistake I did too. Yeah, so it was a bit hard. Can you give me like a tip for international candidates to study the break part, if you have any tips for
You know
exam?
what? I actually I spoke at the NABA, the National Association of Black Accountants, the Southern Region Student Conference last week, and I did a CPA exam prep um, presentation, and I got the same question. There were some international students in there, and I mean, I just feel like, unfortunately, you guys are at a disadvantage because of just the U.S. tax laws. So I would say, again, going back to making it real, is get familiar with the U.S. tax forms and the format and some of the data gathering and the numbers and the information that you'll need, because it seems like, or maybe it's just my bad luck with the exam, but it seemed like all the things I felt like I didn't know that well were the things that popped up on my exam. So just trying to be familiar with the forms, understanding the different rules. There's Pub 17, Publication 17, which is published by the IRS, which basically outlines a lot of that tax language and just different things that would benefit you guys on the exam. And I think, what's the other one? Circular 230, I think, is another publication from the IRS that is very resourceful for tax preparers and people who are trying to really understand that content section.
Yeah, great tips, yeah. What about the BEC part? Any advice and tips for this part?
So BEC is actually my favorite section. I don't know why I even have a favorite section, but the thing about BEC is, unlike FAR or Audit or Reg, is that the content doesn't build, right? You start off talking about SOX and corporate governance and internal control, and then you move on to what's some of the BEC content? Supply and demand, market concepts. Then you move on to cost accounting. It's crazy that I know this. You move on to cost accounting, you move on to operations management, and then you're talking about information technology, which if anybody's brain functions like mine, I'm thinking, I'm an accountant. I don't care about IT. Why do I need to know about IT? So you have these 5 core areas that are not related in any way, shape, or form. And BEC is just a matter of knowing. You really have to get into the content, be able to understand it and apply it to different situations. Because, I mean, even with FAR, once you start understanding the transactions and the GL accounts, even if it doesn't make sense, once you move on to the next section and you're talking about the financial statements, you're going to see those accounts again. You're going to see those transactions again. So that helps with the reinforcement. But with BEC, you have these 5 random areas that are unrelated that you just really have to understand. Now, the good thing is there's not a ton of math and calculations involved until you get to maybe cost accounting and operations, but it really helps. From my perspective, BEC helped me understand the economies, not only here in the US, but just how the world interacts and transacts with each other. Different economies, when you're dealing with imports and exports and supply and demand and different market equilibriums. And my analogy is, if you've ever been at work, since a lot of our attendees are professionals and they work in these environments, if you go into a break room and you see the television on and the television is tuned into CNBC, for example, where they're talking about the stock market and the business and all the different tickers scrolling at the bottom, BEC helps make sense of all of that, is really what that is. And so in the spirit of trying to make things real, I actually started watching CNBC when I was studying for BEC, because I felt like it kind of made made things make sense. Like they talked about GDP on CNBC. They're always talking about supply and demand. And it really helped me to make sense of the content and to really reinforce it for me. One thing I find with a lot of my students, I have a student right now who's going to be testing for BEC in just a few weeks. And we got to the tutoring part for cost accounting, and she just kind of threw her hands up in the air like, why do I even need to know this? Like, I don't care about widgets and cost of production and, you know, how much raw materials, because most of us accountants work in service-based industries. So we're not dealing with raw materials and COGS and things of that nature. But I told her, similar to what I said when you and I first started talking, is that we've moved so far away as accountants from this debit and credit function to being a strategic partner for business. So even though you don't have to do this in your day-to-day job, those production managers and that management team rely on our interpretation of the data to figure out, okay, do we have enough materials to make it through our busy season? With holiday coming up over here for a lot of retail companies, this is where that information becomes valuable. So I told her, you know, take a step back and look at the bigger picture. It's not just about understanding your raw material variances or your labor efficiency, but helping the company to make the best decisions going forward. So BEC is very much an in-depth application of business concepts that really helps to drive home the full circle of business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give us some tips on how to prepare for the written communication section of the BEC exam?
Yes. So the thing that I try to tell my students with this, because I find that a lot of my students struggle with this because BEC is the only section that has the written communication. And I had heard so many things about this particular part of the exam where, you know, if you don't know it and you just like use some keywords, they'll give you points for the keywords, but we still don't know the rhyme and reason behind scoring the CPA. I mean, you can't even get 100. The most you can get is a 99. So as far as the written communication goes, I like to tell my students first to, once you read the scenario and you understand whatever question you have to answer or whatever metric you have to calculate, start off the memo by restating the question. The purpose of this memo is to talk about how SOX has impacted internal control, for example. So basically restating the question that you're asking, and then just pull back those layers to define internal control. What are some components that we need to be aware of when it comes to internal control? Think about the parties that are involved. What is management's responsibility? What is the board's responsibility? Because those are two different things. And then taking it a step further, what is the external auditor's responsibility? And then even going a step further and giving some background as to why SOX even exists. I mean, we all have heard about the stories of Enron and Arthur Andersen and the Tycos of the world. So just trying to paint some, you know, add some context to the question itself. I have this automatic light in my office where if I'm still, the light will go off. It's like an energy saver, so I just had to turn it back on. But I always tell them, start with restating the question and then just peel back the layers from there. So what exactly is internal control? It's almost like a who, what, where, when, why, and how type of approach, where if you can answer those questions about whatever you're being asked, then you'll probably do pretty well on the written section. The other thing I tell my students, because again, we're in the spirit of trying to make this real, because once we pass the exam, we're actually going to be doing this, to create a format as if you're actually sending this memo to a controller or a CFO of an organization to say, hi, Mr. or Mrs. such and such, this memo is to do A, B, and C. Have your second paragraph where you're kind of going through that who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then wrap it up with, I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you may have, and add your name, because in practice, you don't want to just send a memo and there's no salutation. You don't have your name. So really getting in the the habit of moving in the spirit of already being a CPA. So aside from the technical components, definitely try to keep that, that professional piece of it too, because that's a huge component of being a public servant, which we are as CPAs and working with our clients.
Exactly, absolutely. So at least like know the formats, how you're gonna begin,
Yes.
what to write. Yeah, that's important.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, and one last thing I like to say about the written communications, because sometimes I find that students feel like, well, I don't really know exactly what to say, or I don't know if I'm giving enough information. So going back to the keywords, I would suggest if you get something about SOX or internal controls, as you write out your memo, make sure that you include those keywords that you may have seen throughout your study, where you have SOX as part of your response. You have internal control, you have governance somewhere in your memo, you have maybe the auditor, the board of directors, just touching on different things, enterprise risk management, just trying to touch on different things that are related to that topic, so that even if your memo doesn't flow the way you feel it does, at least when it's being scored, hopefully the scorer will pick up on those keywords and say, okay, at least they touched on the key words and the key topics that we were looking for.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Great. Yeah, so any advice on how to take well-organized notes as the exam material is overwhelming? So any advice here?
Yeah, and taking the notes is really important when it comes to being effective with your studying and really managing your time and being disciplined with it, because I think the downfall that I see a lot of candidates make is they try to take notes on every topic in every section. They try to answer every single question. And before you even start taking notes, it's important to know the areas that you're strong in versus the areas that you need to work on. Because if you are clear on the areas that you're strong in, then you would be fine just practicing multiple choice questions, practicing the simulations, and the written communications in the case of VEC. It's those areas where you feel like, I don't know, I think I understand part of this, but not the whole thing, and I feel like I need more practice. Those are the areas to hone in on and really take your notes. And I'm a fan of taking your own notes, because with the CPA review courses, a lot of them have their study guides and their videos, and they may have 10 chapters of material where you feel like, okay, I'm good with 7 of these 10 chapters. I just need to focus on these 3. But some candidates will feel like, oh, okay, because they gave me all 10, I need to go through all 10. So you end up not really being effective with your time because you're studying things that you're already strong in. And so when you try to hone in on the areas that make you uncomfortable and just try to make your notes from there, and jot down the notes in a way that, number one, you will understand it. And number two, if you had to repeat it and explain it to somebody else, if they understand it, then you got it. And so there are some candidates who like to read the study guides and then watch the videos and then do the practice questions. But I like to do the reverse. And I tell my students to start with the questions so that you know which questions are you getting right and which ones are you getting wrong. And those ones that you're getting wrong are the topic areas to really get your practice in with. And then you can make your own notes to say, well, this is what the textbook said that didn't really make sense to me, but when I wrote it down myself or drew a graph or a picture or what have you, whatever works for you, this is what helps it make sense. So the CPA review courses will give every candidate the same materials, right? And it's up to us to figure out, how do we best study? How can we make it effective for ourselves? Because if you have 5 CPA candidates who all purchase the same review course, they all take the same exam on the same day, you're going to get 5 candidates with 5 different scores. because they're going to study differently. There's going to be a different level of effort. And even with everybody having the exact same content, we all learn differently. Some of us are visual. Some of us like to read and then regurgitate. So it really just depends on how you study and applying those course materials to the way that you study.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, how much time does each part need for studying, and how do you prefer allocating the study time per week?
So I think the time varies, kind of like we just talked about. It depends on how you study, but it also depends on how much do you know already. Like when I talked about FAR, I knew a majority of the FAR content. So I just had to hone in on those certain things that I knew I needed more practice on. So it really depends. I'd say most candidates spend at least 20 hours a week studying. At least I did. And I find that a lot of my students that I work with are probably somewhere in that area, a minimum of 20 hours a week. And I'm finding that regardless of the section, they're putting in the same amount of work. I mean, now FAR might be an exception. We know that just from a quantity standpoint, that FAR has more volume of material. But when it comes to reading and watching videos and doing practice exams, I'm finding that my students are putting in about 20 hours a week, which is the equivalent of a part-time job. So I have students who are just strictly studying and they have the time in the day. And then I had some students who they work full-time, they work normal business hours. And so they're studying a few hours during the weekday. So they'll do maybe 2 to 4 hours during the week. And then on the weekends, they'll go up to maybe 6 or 7 hours, just depending on what they have going on. So again, it's important to manage your time, understand the areas that you really need to focus on, and then just being disciplined. I mean, you're probably going to miss some happy hours with your friends. You're probably not going to be able to binge watch all of your favorite shows like you've been accustomed to doing, but this is only until you get through the CPA exam, right? And one thing I say, and I repeat it over and over, is this is a short-term sacrifice that we all are making for a long-term gain. So just put the time in, be disciplined, and once you get through it, you won't have to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great advice and motivational too. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So, what is the best strategy for the final 3 to 4 days before the exam?
So when you get to a point where your exam is less than a week away, 3 or 4 days out, at that point, for me, my approach is videos down, study guides down. You should just be doing practice exams, because at this point, you have to get into the habit. You have to start timing yourself, and you have to make sure that you're not spending 10 minutes on one question, or that you can actually get through the entire exam. The other reason I say is to focus just on that is because when you focus on just the practice exams for those last 3 or 4 days, you're seeing all of the material just randomly thrown at you. Where if we go back to BEC, for example, you might spend 2 or 3 weeks on corporate governance, and then you'll spend another 2 weeks on cost accounting, and that's all you're seeing. But when you're doing the practice exams, you might have question number 5 is corporate governance. Question number 6 is about information technology. Question number 7 is about cost accounting. So now you're able to see the content come together and really prepare yourself so that when you're sitting in front of that screen on exam day, you're not thrown off, or you don't feel like, okay, I've never seen this before, I don't know how to answer it. So I definitely say last 3 to 4 days is just doing the practice. I feel like cramming is ineffective, and just really getting yourself into the motions of, I'm going to have these 3 multiple choice testlets followed by simulations. Let me get familiar with how the simulations might be thrown at me. What are some things I need to be aware of? Of course, take a few of your own notes, but last 3 or 4 days definitely should just be major 99% practicing exams.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you suggest like tackling the weak areas before the exam, like the weak areas that CPA candidates are not good in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say once you've identified those areas where you feel like you need more practice, I would, with the study guide, I would go back to a study guide. If you're a reader, I would go back to the videos if you're more of a visual person. And then, like I said, try to explain it to someone else to see if it makes sense, but also jot down your own notes in a way that you will understand. Because even if you have a concept you're struggling with, statement of cash flows, for example, if you're struggling with that, the book might explain it in a way that just does not make sense to you. But then you might go back and watch a video or do the practice questions and then start to make sense to say, okay, this is my translation of what the book is saying. And so you have your own interpretation of how to get stronger in your weak areas. The other thing with the weak areas is more practice, more multiple choice practice, more simulations practice, because you will learn a lot about why the right answer is the right answer, but you will also understand why those other 3 answers are the wrong answers. Because most of not all of the review courses, if you click on an answer that's wrong, it's going to tell you why it's wrong. So you kind of get both sides of the coin to say, okay, this is the right answer, and now I understand why this is the wrong answer. So it brings you a little bit of clarity as far as, if this is my weak area, this is what I need to hone in on. I keep getting this answer wrong because I keep thinking the formula is this when it's really this. And so a lot of that is really going to come and become clear to you through the practice.
Yeah, great. So any tips for the exam day?
Wow, that's funny. So I wear glasses, and on exam day I wear my contacts because I have to take off my glasses. They want to inspect them. I usually wear like sweatpants to the testing center because there are no pockets. So there's just nothing extra that I have to do. Anything that's going to overcomplicate the process, I try not to do. So I go in with my sweatpants because there's no pockets. I usually have on a shirt that has no pockets. I wear my contacts instead of my glasses. I eat very, very light. And I'm a person that I probably drink a gallon of water a day easily, which means I go to the bathroom a lot. But on exam day, I don't drink a lot of water. And I have gotten to the point after taking 13 exams that I kind of had a ritual where, okay, I'm only going to have a banana, or I'm going to have a banana and some almonds. I'm going to have a few sips of water because I don't want to have to leave the testing center, because if you leave and come back, you have to get body scanned again. I leave my watches and my Fitbits at home. Like, I just go in there bare minimum, just dress down. I just don't want to overcomplicate that process. The other thing I don't do on exam day is I don't look at any materials. I don't look at books. I don't look at videos. I feel like if I've been studying this long and I've made it to exam day, I think I have this in the bag. So you have to walk into the testing center with that confidence to say, I've been studying for several weeks, for several months, and I'm going to be successful. Because a lot of times it's our mindsets that kind of have us hung up. And I've had experiences where I've been in my exam and I would see a question like, uh-oh, I've never seen this before. I don't know. How do I answer this? I don't know. And I would like start panicking. So when you just take a few deep breaths to say, okay, I got this. I've been looking at this material. None of this is foreign to me. I know this. I'm going to do well. Sometimes you just have to start with the mental mindset that I can do this and I'm going to be successful. And of course, you know, avoid the pockets, avoid the glasses, anything that can make that process easier. And the night before, definitely make sure you have your IDs, you have your NTS, your notice to schedule. I have actually been in line waiting to get into the testing center and seeing people turned away because they forgot a passport, because they forgot an ID. And they are not going to bend or break when it comes to identifying people. So just make sure that you read thoroughly your notice to schedule that's going to tell you everything you need to bring. Arrive to the testing center early. If your exam is at noon, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. And so our traffic is insane, whether it's 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. So make sure you arrive early to the testing center, because if you get there after your start time, they're also going to turn you away. So definitely prepare your IDs and things the night before. Wear simple clothing. Minimize the jewelry, try to minimize the water, and, trying to have a light meal, nothing too heavy that will have you going back and forth to the bathroom. And just tell yourself in your mind that you got this, and you'll do great.
Love it, love it. Great tips and advice, and really you are saying things that a lot of people may not pay attention to, which is incredible, and that's great. Yeah.
Yes. See, and I used to, when I was studying, and I would get those fails and I would be so devastated. Like, why is it me? Why do I have to keep taking the exams? Why is it so hard for me? But I learned a lot about myself in this process, about how resilient I am and how bad I wanted the exam, to where I kept going back for more, even when I was failing. And so I just tell students that your success is highly dependent on your mindset and your motivation and your discipline. So there are a ton of certified public accountants in the world, and we're just waiting for you to come join us in CPA land.
Great, yeah. So we have a few moments left for the interview, and I would like to tell the audience that you have offered them a free gift. So
I have.
About
yes. So I get a ton of questions on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, where people will message me. Some of them have found my email address and emailed me to say, hey, I saw you posted blah, blah, blah about the CPA. Can you help me with FAR? Or what should I know for audit? And really just trying to get some tips and some pointers to be successful on the exam. And so I have an ebook. It's called CPA. And I called it that because the premise is it's going to be your name, CPA, once you're done reading this book. And so I share a lot of tips about how to study, some free resources as far as on the AICPA's website, and just some things online that have been beneficial for me when I was studying. And it's an email series where once you get the ebook, each day it's a 4-part series that will tell you about, I'm breaking down the FAR exam. Okay, here's what you need to know for FAR. Here are the study strategies for FAR. And I do the same thing with BEC audit and reg. So just really, I took my my email series and I answered the frequently asked questions that candidates always ask me about the exam. I also include a link to a podcast episode of the Working Mamas podcast where I did a CPA Q&A. And I took all of the questions that I was getting and I answered them on the podcast. And so the podcast is on SoundCloud. I'm usually on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn. My Instagram and Twitter is at Nick Winston, NIKKWINSTON CPA. And I'm mostly talking about videos. I share tutorials. I just put out a tutorial about break-even analysis. I had a student that was struggling with that. And I just put together a video tutorial where I walked through some problems and just broke down the whole scenario for her. So share a lot of tips about that. My website is nickwinstoncpa.com. So I have a whole section about CPA exam tips, also some career advice for accountants, because once we become CPAs, the next step is, okay, how do I use this to elevate my career, and what should I be doing, and how do I get to the next step? So I have a lot of career advice that I share. My hashtag is career combos. So I answer career questions on LinkedIn and also on Instagram as well. So anybody who is tuned in today is more than welcome to access the ebook, again, to learn about the study tips, things to do the day before, the day of, during that time when you're waiting for score release, and really just trying to get people prepared for the exam based on my experience being a 13-time test taker.
Yeah, great gift. And I encourage you guys all to go ahead and get this free gift and contact Nikki directly if you need any support or any help during your CPA exam journey.
Yes.
So Nikki, can you give us can you give CPA candidates one last word?
Read the last sentence first in the questions.
Yep.
That's usually where the ask is. That's usually where they're going to ask you a question. They're going to ask you to calculate something, or you have to fill in the blank. The other thing is read the problem twice so that you make sure you're not misinterpreting the question, because the CPA exam is notorious for wordplay. They'll add an extra word to say something is or is not, just to throw you off your game to see if you're paying attention. So of course, they're testing our technical knowledge, right? But they're also looking at, are we attentive to details? If we don't know the answer, do we know how to do our diligence and find the answer? So before you dig into trying to pick which one of those 4 answers is the right answer, read the last sentence first and read the problem again so that you're clear on what's being asked, because it's very easy to lose points because you misread the question. So easy way to get points is to understand the question and know what it's asking of you.
Yeah, very, very helpful. Well, thank you, Nikki, for being with us today. You gave us great tips and advice to pass this piece of exam. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ala'a. And I appreciate you doing this. This is so needed. And I'm just really excited for you. And again, I'm super excited for you to be doing this and really being a resource for the candidates out there, because we definitely need it. So I'm happy to do this with you. I support you 100%, and you know, much success with my CPA excellence.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So guys, make sure to watch the next interview with a new CPA exam speaker and new CPA exam tips, tricks, and advice. So make sure not to miss the next interview. See you then. Goodbye.